I want to make first the announcement that after the meeting we had earlier today with the prisoners, and in keeping with the promise that we're going to act almost instantaneously, we actually did, as a matter of fact. And we managed to get a number of things done, and I would wish to make mention of the very important one, and that is the development here of a commission of inquiry for purposes of inquiring into the disturbances and resultant deaths of 17 prisoners at the Camp Street prison on the morning of the 3rd, 2016. Now that commission of inquiry will also delve into even subsequent disturbances. The members comprising the commission of inquiry will include Chairman, former Justice James Patterson, Ms. Merle Mendonza, and Mr. Dale Erskine, and those names will comprise the 3-member committee. The terms of reference will be to investigate, examine, and report on the causes, circumstances, and conditions that led to the disturbances on the morning of the 3rd of March that resulted in the death of 17 prisoners and any other subsequent disturbances at the Camp Street prisons, Georgetown. Inquire into the nature of all injuries sustained by the prisoners during the disturbances on that morning and any other subsequent disturbances, and determine whether the conduct of the staff of the Ghana Prison Service who were on duty on the morning of that 3rd March 2016 and thereafter was in conformity with the standard operating procedures of the Ghana Prison Service. Now, there are some other determinations to be made, but we also want them to make recommendations. The Commission shall make comprehensive recommendations to ensure the safety of the prisons, and in that regard to examine and make findings and recommendations to improve the physical infrastructure of the prison, the existing security arrangements in respect of the custody, management, and control of prisoners, the appropriate treatment of prisoners in compliance with legal and other requirements, and to prevent a recurrence of any such disturbance. And there are certain rules of procedure that will be laid down for the commissioners and how to conduct this commission, all in accordance with the Commission of Inquiries Act, Chapter 1903, and of course procedures in accordance with the High Court Act, Chapter 301, and any other laws enabling that kind of commission to be held, so that we can get to the bottom of the purposes that the commission was created for. I have asked that there be some photocopies of the terms of reference and this document from which I have just read. I hope that you would have had copies of the document. Now, yesterday we press conference, I did indicate that we would not give the names of those until such time as the families were notified. The families indeed and next of kin and so on of those 17 inmates that died, they were notified, and they include Rayan Paddy. He was in there for the offense of armed robbery, and he was admitted since the 30th of March 2015. Andrew Philander, he was in there for murder, and he was there since 23rd February 2008. Jermaine Otto for murder, 2014, the 26th of August. Kirk Clark were there for murder, 31st, the 7th month, 2015. Aaron Eastman, unlawful possession of ammunition, the 9th of December, 2015 was the date he was admitted. Anthony Primo, armed robbery, 19th of November 2015. Ashraf Ali for murder, 1st of February 2011. Amos Hillary for murder, 6th of February 2011. Rohan Tikaram, murder, 25th of April 2014. Richard Hubbard, murder, 31st of January 2014. Randolph Marks for murder, 19th of December 2015. Clifton Joseph for murder, 25th of September 2014. Shaka Mackenzie, robbery with violence, again the 12th of July 2015. Lachman Pratap, 7th of May 2015. Sherwin Trotman for murder and was admitted in 1st of August 2015. Delroy Williams, 24th of October 2014. And Chetram Darandat for murder, 8th of February 2015. The injured inmates are Marcellus Verbeet, Ignatius France, and Andel Ford. Treated and discharged, that is, the three that I just called, they are hospitalized and hospitalized still. Treated and discharged are Anthony Joseph, Dwayne Lewis, and Errol Williams. As regards this, I intend to ask the Director of Prisons and or his representative to keep us updated as to what will transpire in relation to these hospitalized and injured persons. I want to also make mention of the fact that as regards some of the actual ministerial action to be taken forthwith, and as a result of what was more or less demanded by the prisoners in relation to their version of the events and so on, we are going to try immediately to have the telephone calls to their relatives improved from 2 per week to 3 per week at this stage, simply because we do not have the telephone lines to accommodate them. But as soon as we get more telephone lines, and that will be in a couple of weeks' time, we are going to further review this to include it up to 4 or 5 per week. That's telephone calls by prisoners to their relatives per week. We also have indicated to the administration that meals must be on time and in accordance with the standing orders there of that quality which the prisoners, the prison's rule book, I think it's a rule book? Standing orders. Must be of that standard that is prescribed for in those orders. As regards the families of the deceased, they have, of course, as I mentioned, been communicated to, and there will be support given to them in relation to the funerals of these persons that died, these prisoners that died, and that will be conducted by our Social Protection Ministry. I understand Minister Valda Lawrence, or is it Minister Keith Scott, will be making an announcement as regards that. The very important matter of long detention, I will ask, just skip across there rather than we shift this.
Yes.
There were some developments today
Yes.
in relation to their concern about long detention.
Yes. 2 matters. One, the question of the support for the families, the Ministry of Social Protection. I believe they have issued a statement in that regard, expressing the condolences of the administration and the fact that we will support the families of these persons who died under these tragic circumstances. That support will be for funeral arrangements and support for the families of the deceased afterwards. by the Ministry of Social Protection. They are already on the ground. I believe some representatives are at the prisons, and they're in touch with the relatives of the deceased. Insofar as the complaint that was made about the long periods of time that prisoners are on remand, and the fact that they believe that they ought to get quicker trials, we have raised this matter with the Chancellor of the Judiciary, both myself and the Vice President Ramjatan, and the Chancellor has undertaken to meet with us early next week for us to work on whatever we need to put in place to ensure that that matter is addressed. So what we can say to the inmates is that they are concerned with respect to long periods of incarceration on remand, that matter will be addressed, and it will be addressed very swiftly by the judiciary and the administration. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Joe. Lest I forget, I will be also making the announcement that Mr. Samuels, who is the Deputy Director, will be on leave for the next 6 weeks from that environment there for good reasons as a result of a perspective given by both the Director of Prisons, myself, and also Mr. Harmon. We think that that is a necessity at this stage. There is presently going on also the repairs to the damage done by the prisoners, and I would want a narrative of what's happening there since we met with the prisoners to be given by Mr. Pilgrim.
My voice has not returned since.
You're doing well. You're doing very well. You feel it.
I first want to officially extend my sympathy to the relatives of the inmates who would have lost their lives at the facility that I'm responsible for as the officer in charge. Secondly, I must emphasize that it is my mandate to preserve the lives of everyone, every inmate under my care and the officers who supervise those inmates. Yesterday was a very unfortunate incident, I must say. And with that, I'm a bit old-fashioned, but I first want to say on my behalf that I'm sorry. Sorry simply because being in a prison environment, that is not a word that you hear very often. I know saying sorry is not an excuse, as the minister would have made mention that a commission of inquiry would be launched, and that commission of inquiry would do a detailed investigation, and also we have the police department is doing their investigations as we speak to apportion whatever sanctions as it relates to the findings that would be unearthed as a result of the unrest of the prison and the lives being lost. So I just want to say that I don't have to wait on an inquiry or an investigation to personally say sorry simply for the fact that I am responsible for a prison location, and the laws of Guyana would have stated clearly that as an officer in charge, and when you decide to take up that challenge as an officer in charge, it's like a soldier with his troops. you have to be responsible for everyone under your charge. A brief on this morning's occurrence. We would have had an unrest. Yes, we would have had an unrest this morning, which would have lasted for some period. It would have started from minor voicing of concerns, and as a result of the voicing of concerns and grievances, knowing that those concerns would have been shouted by a group of prisoners, persons who would have been experiencing those grievances and concerns would have joined in. It would have led to the other divisions lending support to those concerns. And given the fact that the prison is in an emotional state right about now, both officers and inmates, it would have erupted. However, as a result of the Joint Services presence in the prison yard, we would have managed to bring the situation under some degree of control, notwithstanding that we would have, the structures would have received a lot of damage. The minister would have touched generally on the grievances that were communicated to him by a team of inmates who would have been drawn from the area that was affected first, and then other inmates from the general population who would have witnessed what would have transpired, so as to create a balance as to the information being flowed to the minister. Some of the contributory factors, as both ministers would have mentioned, were the long periods of remand and committal time. We are quite aware of our judicial system, and the persons in there are quite aware of it also, and as of such, they would have clearly voiced their concerns as to their feelings towards their imprisonment. Some would have touched on their wrongful imprisonment, which would have added to them feeling the way they would have expressed themselves, and the poor conditions of the prisons with regards to facilities and so forth. They would have highlighted in detail to the team that would have chaired that morning's function. The inquiry would be preview more in detail to every other aspect. So I would not want to speculate, since a committee would be responsible, inquiry would be responsible for that. Since this morning, intervention with the minister and his team, the situation is somewhat normal within the prison. The inmates are cooperating and following instructions. We are cleaning because there's a lot of debris. So we're cleaning with the assistance of the inmates. We're effecting repairs to the structures. The team who would have served as the inmates' representative would have met with the minister. They were charged to return to the general population of the respective divisions and communicate to the other inmates what were some of the issues that were raised and the response that was given. Both ministers would have even further commented on the initial action. Reps from the Ministry of Infrastructure would have visited to render assistance. They're there. We have persons from the Harbour Bridge who are assisting also in welding and so forth. And we have persons from social protection. I want to say to the families, the relatives of the victims, you to make contact with the prison or the reps from social protection. They're there to pilot you in the right direction as it relates to the investigation, rendering support to the families, and any other assistance that would be needed during this period. They would also be really creating a balance, since there's a lot of things that the families would be hearing through the media. They will have an opportunity to have some first-hand information. So it is in their best interest to try to make contact with the prison or by extension social protection. We're currently trying to do some reshuffling within the prison, and as the question would have been asked at yesterday's press conference, as it relates to the relocation of some persons, since we have young offenders at Camp Street Prison, we would have relocated our young offenders to Mary Prison. Those young offenders would be receiving phone calls to contact their families, to assure their families of their conditions come tomorrow morning. So that is what is currently happening at the prison, and it's still a joint services exercise this time.
47 young offenders have been transferred out of the Georgetown prison to Mary. And so that answers the question.
How long? Final question. How long?
Until the repairs are effected.
No. How long will the COI go for?
Well, we'll have to do, you could answer that. Instruments
Initially,
and all.
the first, we expect it should be a very intense period, and we're asking that the first report should be by the 15th of March. Any additional periods can be granted based on an application to the minister.
Thank you very much.
With regards to these phone calls, Mr. Pilgrim, could you sir say if these phone calls are regularly monitored? Because at the end of the day, these are still suspected criminals or persons awaiting trials. Serious offenses.
Are they monitored?
Are the phone calls being monitored? Are they usually monitored?
Yes, our phone calls are monitored. We have a two-line system, whereas when the prison is receiving a phone call, we'll have somebody on a receiver listening to the call. So the calls would be monitored through the welfare officer, the relative. Or if you have a copy of our standing orders, you will see basically the procedure for phone calls in and out. So I think the standing orders is a public document, so you can check it and you'll see the SOP for phone calls for inmates.
Okay.
Ministers in your COI, you're looking at the SOP for the business survey. Will you also be looking at whether the present SOP, to what level they conform with international best practices, to see if those need to be adjusted? And secondly, can you update on conditions of any member of the joint services who may have been injured during this unrest period?
You would like to answer the last one there?
Right.
Did
With
we
regards to
put
the
that?
last question, some of our ranks were injured this morning. They're currently at the Georgetown Hospital receiving medical care. 5.
Serious condition?
I haven't received a total update as yet, so I don't want to assume. Right? The total, we had seven inmates. 7 inmates would have went.
Because there are any other recommendations that they would want to make that
7 inmates and 5 prisoners.
Yeah.
will help.
But the inmates would have returned. The inmates would have
Already been
returned.
discharged.
Correct, they would have returned.
In relation to that question, Beverly, that you asked, there is a general rule in relation to to examine and recommend to improve the physical infrastructure and the security arrangements in relation to and the management and control of prisoners. Specifically, I do not see in my terms of reference here as to whether we are going to upgrade the standing orders as you ask. But I rather suspect that the recommendations can fill that vacuum, if indeed there is a vacuum in that regard.
Yeah, but as a general rule, when commissions of inquiries are set up, there is always a requirement for them to make recommendations or any other recommendations that might not have been covered specifically by the terms of reference, and that they always utilize what is best practice in that particular industry.
Yeah, and to make generally
right.
to
So
any,
they'll make general recommendations to the minister
on any action.
on any action whatsoever, and that will avoid a recurrence of that situation. And you'd recognize too from the composition of the commission, you have a retired judge, you have a person who is an expert almost now on human rights
and prisoners'
and
rights.
prisoners' rights, and also you have a former director of prisons on the board that would have had extensive training and exposure in prison situations, not only in Guyana but around the world.
Minister Georgetown, you had mentioned a while ago that Mrs. Samuels was a deputy director of prison was sent on leave. Could you just give us some more information as to what prompted that decision?
Well, there were some, by the way, I must make it quite clear, this is not any indictment on Samuels at all. But during the course of this morning's expressions of views, there was a number of the prisoners that indicated a couple of things about Mr. Samuels. And for both his interest and also the interest of the prison and the discretion here, my discretion, I indicated that it might be advisable at this stage that Mr. Samuels, in view of the fact also that we are asking that these senior ranks do take their annual leave rather than accumulate it all the time, it's about a winsome, opportune moment for him to go and leave.
And just secondly, how long from now are the bodies expected to be relatives for
I think, Pilgrim, you will be best to answer that.
All right. After the relatives are contacted, they would be
Talk with the
In-
social protection too.
they will be in contact with the police force. Since persons would have lost their lives here, the police force will take the lead role as it relates to if PMs would be done to determine the cause of deaths and these things. And when those bodies are cleared for burial, a request would be made as it relates to the release If the relative cannot handle the burial arrangements, the prison has provision for that, and they will simply make a request for assistance with burial. We have the social protection, and that's why the social protection ministry is assisting us in that process. So we have our welfare is liaising with Ministry of Social Protection to
To get
give
that.
guidance to the relative throughout this whole process. So,
If what?
How long will it take? Do you have any
Well, we'll have to get from the pathologist the
Correct.
report, the date as to when he's going to perform the postmortem and all of that. And we know that the pathologist is a pretty busy man, Mr. Nihal Singh. So, yes, it might take some time. At this stage, I wouldn't be in a position. I am certain Mr. Pilgrim will not be in a position as to how long. Now, one more question.
In the interest of residents in the area and their safety, do you guarantee that repairs will be completed before the evening, and if not, what security will be in place?
excellent question. As I said, it is still a joint exercise for operations. We have the GDF maintaining cordons in support of the police. We have the fire service on standby, and we have the prison officers. The police are within the prison with a double cordon and outside of the prison. So even though the buildings would not be back to top standard, you will have an active presence from the joint services in and around that area. So you will advise persons who are living there to inform their visitors that the area would be cordoned off for some period, and they could just look out for any other release as it relates to any change as it is. But they can be assured of the joint services presence within that area.